Greetings to everyone. Today I decided to show you a game, and there's few reasons for this game. Number one is I haven't been posting any games recently, so I thought it's about time to resume this activity. And also this game features two brilliant moves. And for those of you who don't know, it's a feature of chess.com analysis. And I was also asked recently what's the difference between the brilliant move and the best move. And the best way I can explain it is that the brilliant move is a critical move, as much as it is the best, of course, in the position. It is also the only good move that someone can play in order to keep the advantage. So I played black pieces, and my opponent started with e4. I replied with c6, Caro-Kann, knight of 3, d5, takes and takes, d4. I played bishop to g4. My opponent played bishop to d3. So far we're developing, and here I decided to capture the knight on f3, and because in such positions it's a strong piece. So queen recaptures. White definitely has a slight advantage here, because as you can see, the queen and the bishops and the bishop and the light square bishop is already developed, and black only has the pawn on d5, and no other pieces are developed. So I replied with knight to c6. My opponent played c3, and I think specifically against me, whenever opponents played this pawn structure, you can see the pawn on b2, on c3, on d4, I struggled the most to find a plan to how to fight against this pawn structure. So I played e6. My opponent castled. I played knight to f6, h3, bishop to e7, bishop to f4. I castled. My opponent played knight to d2. I played bishop to d6, asking for a trade of the bishops, because as you can see, my opponent's bishops are very active, and they are pointing on my king side. So I would like to take one of the bishops out. So the opponent replied with bishop to g5, not wanting to exchange the bishops, the dark square bishops. Okay, I moved my bishop back to unpin the knight. Okay, rook from f to e1, and now I played h6, asking my opponent what they want to do. You want to trade, or you want to move your bishop back? So my opponent played bishop to f4, and now I played rook to c8. So this is this is a useful move to put the rook on the semi-open file, which at the moment doesn't look like it's giving black any sort of advantage, but on the long term it could be very good. And now my opponent played a3, and this is exactly the type of formation I struggle against, because as you can see on the queen side I have 3 pawns versus 4 pawns, and I only have the dark square bishop, and as you can see, the c5, the b4 squares are dark, and I cannot play basically on this side. And also my knight is not very active as well. It can't do much. The only square it can go to is b3, but this only can happen if I push the pawn to a4 to protect the knight, but again, doesn't do much. So I'm asking my opponent again about trading the bishops. My opponent chooses to also counter my rook on c8 with the rook on c1. Now I take. This is what I wanted to do. Queen takes. And now queen to b6. And this is basically developing the queen, connecting the rooks, and also attacking the pawn on b2. Now my opponent shifts the rook to b1, which kind of makes the previous move, rook from a to c1, like a waste of move. Okay, knight a5, bishop to c2, and now I put my knight on c4. Knight takes, rook takes, with the idea to double the rooks on the c-file, which again is not critical, but could be useful in the future, because as we all know, tactics arise from a superior position. Now opponent placed the queen on f3. Okay, so as promised, double the rooks. Queen to d3, attacking the h7 square, which is protected for the moment by the knight. However, I play g6, preventing this idea from white. Now there's a nice rook lift on e3. Now I play knight to e4 with the idea that my opponent could play f3, which he does, and weakens a little bit his king side. And also notice that now also that opens the diagonal from the queen, looking at the white king. Now knight to g3. There's a pawn push. Now I put my knight to f5, attacking the rook. And now the opponent played e2, which is not the best move, because that, I mean, it kind of was a necessary move, because otherwise my opponent would be down in exchange. But this opens even further the diagonal to the king, and this is the time I use it. So I take on d4 with my knight, and this is basically a brilliant idea according to the analysis on chess.com, and it's something I haven't observed until now, but I mean I didn't analyze all my games, but this is something that I noticed for the first time, and I really liked it, and that's why I decided to show this game. So pawn takes. This is a nice looking knight sacrifice. It's a temporary one, because now the idea is that we take with the rook, and we're attacking the queen, and also wherever the queen moves, we will have a discovered check with the queen and the king. So my opponent found a good move. As at least I thought it's a good reply. Computer doesn't think like that, but let's see what happens next. So now it's not easy to find a continuation. However, I did find it, which is rook takes on c2, and this is the second brilliant move. And why not, having two brilliant moves in one game? Two is always better than one. And now after rook takes, there's a discovered attack on the queen while giving check. So now the rook takes on d1, and now the queen takes queen on e3. And the material is, I have a slight advantage, but the thing is that my pawn structure is very strong. My king is safe, and the rooks don't have any open lines except the c-file, but they're not strong enough to protect against the pawn storm in the center. So opponent goes away, because this was also check. Now also the pawn on f4 is gone, and here it's basically it's the end game, and still one can never relax, and keep the tension until the end, and keep the focus also until the end. So rook attacks the queen, queen gives check, king goes away to h1. Now the idea is that I would like to put my queen on d5 and then push the pawns. I want to put the queen behind the pawns and be able to push both of them up. Okay, so rook comes in front of the pawn on d2. Now the queen goes to d6. Now my opponent doubles the rooks on the f file, of course targeting the f7 pawn, which I prevent this idea. Another idea would be just to push the pawn on d3, and then if so, this would be the square, and then if the rook would take, which for example, if I wouldn't play this, if I would just push the pawn and then rook takes, the idea is that I can still push the pawn, and then white does not have this move because it's protected by the queen. But okay, I protect this pawn with the queen, and now I'm just pushing this 2 pawns, and basically my attack is unstoppable. So you can just see that the moves are flowing by itself. There's not much white can do to stop this attack. So even now the rook takes, but black promotes to the second queen, and yeah, basically this is lost. And now the rook is pinned. I'm pushing the pawn with the idea to push it further to h4, which my opponent stopped this idea, but now just f5 with the same threat to bring it to f4. Another idea was to bring the queen here, and then this would attack the rook on d3, because the rook on g3 would be pinned, couldn't capture, and also the idea is to take this the pawn on h3. And yeah, after I played f5, my opponent resigned, and also notice that the rook from g3 cannot take the pawn on g6 because it's pinned. Yeah, so with this I would like to thank my opponent. I really enjoyed the game, and he played really well. Allowed me to make 2 brilliant moves, which I'm very thankful to my opponent for. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would also like to encourage to play more of your own games, and find the beauty of chess in your own games.